This is America's Roundtable. Visit us at americasrt.com. Follow us on Twitter at americasrt. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook. Like and share. This is America's Roundtable from Washington, D.C., a weekly radio program with leading voices from America and the globe, representing the academia, business, think tanks, and the political arena. I am Joel Anand-Sami, your co-host, joined by Natasha Srdoc, economist and chairman of the think tank Adriatic Institute and co-founder of the International Leaders Summit. This weekend, we are delighted to have Congressman Tim Huelskamp join us on America's Roundtable. Congressman Tim Huelskamp was elected to his first term as a United States representative in November 2010. In the 112th Congress, he represents Kansas' 1st congressional district, known as the Big First. His committee assignments include agriculture, budget, and veterans. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman Huelskamp. Welcome to America's Roundtable this weekend.
Welcome, Congressman.
A pleasure to join both of you. I'd love to visit about some issues.
This past week, you introduced an important bill. Congressman Huelskamp, could you share with our listeners the details of this new bill and its significance to our fellow Americans?
Well, I have recently introduced a bill that deals with one of the fastest growing programs in Washington, and that's our food stamp program, also called SNAP. And that would, instead of having Washington run a program, it would turn it over to the states for their administration. I think in general, and particularly in the area of taking care of the poor and needy, that I think local government's the best way to approach that. And our bill would take the money and remove the Washington strings and regulations and controls, and instead let our local folks, particularly at the state level, make that determination and administer a food stamp program. And frankly, it's pretty important because currently there are a record number of Americans on food stamps, 46.7 million Americans on food stamps. The number's grown from 19 million in less than about 10 years ago. The spending has gone up almost 300% during that time period. And there are very few controls on that and limits and protections on the fraud and abuse side. And I think, again, our states and our local cities could do a much better job administering that than the bureaucracy in Washington.
That is significant when you think about a 300% increase. And also, as your office has communicated so clearly and through your leadership, that the farm bill that we have at this stage here, 80% is dedicated to food stamps.
It certainly is, and folks, when they hear about and read about much of the media reports on on the farm bill, forget and do not report the fact that, again, 80% has nothing to do with farming, has to do with food stamps. Back in 1970, with one of my predecessors, Senator Bob Dole, said, hey, let's put the food stamps together with the farm programs, and we'll try to run that through Congress. During that time, a growing percentage of the amount that went to food stamps increased, and actually spending on farm programs has generally decreased or been steady. So we're at today where 80% of that is food stamps, and then you have a farm bill in the Senate that basically cuts nothing and reduces no expenditures for food stamps over the next decade. The Obama administration has proposed to cut not a dime out of food stamps, nothing whatsoever, when it's grown 300% almost in a decade. And certainly most Americans say, hey, you know what, we can do a better job, and I think we can do a better job with actually the last spending if you took off the regulations and actually make certain that folks that are needy should be able to receive food stamps, but those who do not qualify, amazingly now, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans who do not qualify for food stamps somehow are receiving them. That's a problem with the program and something we need to address as soon as possible.
Right. Does that mean, Congressman, that agricultural subsidies actually are duplicated? So do we have agricultural subsidies and the food stamps, or there is some of that canceling out?
Well, on the farm side of the farm bill, there have been direct payments that have been occurring for many years, more than a decade. The ag community actually has agreed to do away a significant cut and reduction on the farm side, and they strongly believe in crop insurance. But they match together the food stamps with a crop insurance program and some other local smaller level farm programs as well, and those get all lumped together. And but there will be significant changes on the farm side. But what is upsetting to most folks, you say, hey, we're going to cut farmers, and that's going to occur. But when we know and see and can point at fraud and waste and misallocation of food stamps, folks say, why aren't we addressing that? And that's a good question. We have asked the Obama administration for a month now. Give us some better proposals on food stamps or anything else in the Farm Bill, and they refuse to participate in that policy process because it is an election year.
Right. And as you've mentioned very clearly, this is an election year, and there has been an important debate brewing. And leaders like yourselves have opened up an important discussion, a debate on the future of America, whether our country will be a state of dependency or creating a state of dependency, or are we going to focus on personal responsibility? And you have certainly articulated that very clearly through your messages on the importance of the soaring debt that we have and deficit that we have in our country. What are your suggestions and what we should do to save the American dream?
It certainly is in jeopardy, and I don't say that just myself. I hear that over and over from constituents, particularly those that are nearing retirement, and they're not worried about the future for them. They're worried about what kind of country they'll hand on to their children, indeed their grandchildren. And they're very worried. When we are carrying $16.1 trillion of debt, we carry a bigger debt load than the citizens of Greece. And look what happened to Greece. We've had a downgrade in our credit rating by one of the major credit rating agencies, a warning by another, and the idea that we can continue to spend more than we're taking in at a clip of trillions of dollars over a 4-year period. They've added $5 trillion in debt. And for you and me on the phone here and most of our listeners, it won't impact them. Somebody has to pay that back. The children and grandchildren are going to pay an enormous debt burden to carry, and that will threaten the American dream, as will the growing regulations, the growing controls coming out of Washington, because our economy was built on freedom and liberty and entrepreneurship, and that's really being threatened. I hear that from small business women all across Kansas and the entire country. They're fearful for the future, but they also recognize that Americans, we can do better. We can do better, and what I'm proposing in these programmatic changes is we can have less power in Washington and keep it at the local level, and particularly at the individual level. Individual responsibility usually works a lot better than a government program.
Congressman, you are an original sponsor of the legislation that is now headed to the Senate for consideration and is called the Buffett Rule Act of 2012. Could you share with us the details of this act?
Well, Mr. Warren Buffett has been very successful and done a tremendous job in investing, but he's said publicly he's very concerned that he hasn't paid enough in taxes. And we've gone back and forth with him and had a lot of letters going back and forth and comments and statements that, well, Mr. Buffett, if you'd like to pay more in taxes, you're certainly welcome to do so. And we signed on to this bill that passed the House this week that would say, hey, if anyone would like to pay more in taxes, and there's some that claim to do that, they're more than able to send that in. Just write an additional check and send to the Treasury, and it can be cashed and applied towards the national debt. And again, but at the end of the day, I don't think Warren Buffett's going to send another dime into Washington. He's been quite an investor. He knows, he does a lot of philanthropic work, particularly in Omaha, where he says, spending dollars locally without Washington involvement is better, and achieves his goal of driving down poverty. And I give him credit for that. But when you become a political mouthpiece for debate over taxes, we wanted to make certain that he indeed could send in additional money, but I doubt that'll happen very often. We tried that in the state of Kansas, and for reason in Kansas, very few people wanted to pay more in taxes, contrary to what some folks do say.
But that's good. He's probably not going to mention it again, that he paid too little taxes.
Yeah, you ask people if they paid too little 10 years ago, and they say, well, no, and many of them are paying more. But what will happen at the end of the year is a real threat to the economy as well. All the tax cuts that were passed during President Bush's first and second term, and as well as President Obama's first term here, is that all those tax relief measures, 2/3 to 90%, depending on the estimate, went to the middle class. All of those expire at the end of the year. And I hear from a lot of businessmen and women, a lot of individual investors, a lot of folks, and 50% of Americans are invested some places. Then they're very worried about what will happen if this massive tax increase takes place on January 1st. It has a real economic threat, and I think we're always seeing some signs of that operating in the economy, where there's that uncertainty there about tax increases, and it actually is going to have quite a detrimental impact long before we get to the end of the year. But again, there's a debate over that. The House, we have passed a bill to at least extend those for 1 year, because fundamentally I think we need reform in the tax code. We need to change it. It's built on decade upon decade of political access to Washington. We need to clean out the tax code, and that's what the Republicans have passed numerous bills to do. But the President and the Senate right now will not take those up. But hopefully we can make some progress after the election.
It's interesting to note, Congressman, that in fact this past week from Europe we heard news that Sweden is now going to reduce its tax rate from 26% to 22% for its corporate tax rate. Certainly Europe is not a bastion for free markets or lower taxation. However, we've seen Eastern Europe reduce taxes significantly, introducing the flat tax, and hopefully your message about the importance of lower taxation and a simplified, non-distortive, and taking away all the loopholes, that specific message will be heard loud and clear by your fellow legislators and the American public.
Well, I certainly hope so. And currently we are number one in the world in terms of our tax rate. And you wouldn't believe that if you listen to some of the debate and in some of the campaigns. But as of April 1st of 2012, we now have the highest business corporate income tax rates in the entire world. Mm-hmm. In some places, they're 1/2 or 1/3 or 1/4. And the effective tax rate in most states in the union is over 30%, sometimes even higher if you're in the state of Illinois. And in some of our competitive countries to the north, it's half. Or again, there's some places, as you mentioned, in Europe, where I know of a company that just signed a long-term tax agreement, income tax rate of 2%. We're at 33. They're at 2%, folks. That is one reason we're losing some of our manufacturing capacity in this country, is because high taxes, high regulation, high uncertainty is encouraging folks to locate elsewhere. So I believe if we lower the tax rate and make the system more fair across the board, have a lower two-tier tax rate, take out a lot of the loopholes, tax credits, and the giveaways in there, businessmen and women say, hey, instead of worrying about the tax code, we're going to worry about business and doing our job and producing products that people want to buy. And at the end result, you grow the economy and you grow the amount of freedom and liberty in our country.
Economic growth is certainly a clearer solution than growing government, basically.
Yeah, and I just had an opportunity to visit with Congressman Paul Ryan, who's on the ticket with Governor Romney, and that, to him, is what this election is about. It's about a choice. You have two different directions to go, and I think it's pretty clear. 4 years ago, maybe it wasn't that clear, but I think folks understand, and they will have their opportunity to make that choice, which is what makes America great. Yeah. We love elections about choices, and I think at the end of the day, I'm hopeful and optimistic that people say, we're going to choose the more liberty and more personal responsibility. They certainly go together, and that's what's driven our economy and our country to become the strongest economy and the strongest country military in the history of the world.
I just wanted to hear your opinion, Congressman. We had Maurice McTee, who was a cabinet member of New Zealand's reform government in 80s, and he actually talked in details how they balanced the budget, how they cancelled agricultural subsidies overnight, how they cancelled the death tax, and how they addressed lobbying in New Zealand. I was wondering, do you see balanced budget in the U.S. in the near future?
The near future will be very difficult, but it can be done. It can be done in as few as 4 or 5 years. It could happen. Thank goodness we have the Canadian experience. And you mentioned other countries that have been deeper in debt, potentially, and move very quickly to reprioritize and reduce spending. We have a tremendous wave of entitlements facing this nation with Medicare and Medicaid in particular. And frankly, with 10,000 Americans reaching 65 every day, it's a growing problem. And the spending we generally talk about on everything but entitlements, that's what a lot of debate over Washington seems to be. But when the real spending will be on entitlements. And in the presidential campaign, I hope they all talk about what are you going to do to save Medicare? Because Medicare is scheduled to go bankrupt in 8 to 9 years if things don't change. And that would be a massive disaster. And numerous other entitlements, because frankly, in the current system, the status quo is no longer working. We need to reform and improve to save the system, and that deals with entitlements. And so I'm very hopeful and optimistic that the American people will listen and will learn and say, hey, yes, we want to save Medicare. Doing nothing means the end of Medicare. And frankly, that's a lot of what the debates hopefully will be about in the next 40-some days as we watch the remainder of this campaign.
Congressman Tim Huelskamp, thank you so much for joining us on America's Roundtable, and we look forward to our discussion in the days to come about ways in saving the American dream and making sure that reformers like you are able to continue the important work on the Hill in addressing some of these key issues.
Well, thank you, and I believe the American dream is alive and well, but that's what elections are about, to see what direction we're going to head. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Congressman. This is America's Roundtable. Visit us at americasrt.com. Follow us on Twitter at americasrt. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook. Like and share.